Okay, all right.
How's everybody? Good? Okay. So do you have any questions? I've gotten notes and casual conversation from a lot of you about making those modifications to your research question. So that'll go directly into your proposal. So let's take a look at all of that. We're going to go over all of this today. So components of your proposal. So there's a PowerPoint for that. And some helpful links here to the Purdue site like Tyree had recommended. So looking over our schedule, we do have components today, some of Chapter 5, finish Chapter 5 on Thursday, and then getting into next week, we'll have an exam next Tuesday. So look for the study guide. I'm going to try to get a study guide out by tomorrow afternoon. I can't guarantee, sometimes things come up, but I will try. As I was talking with Carson earlier today, there will be some of the exam that's going to be opinion-based questions, especially with regard to ethics. So on use of animals in research and so on. So I'll try to give you the best direction I can in terms of where to look for content on the exam. So 1, 2, and Chapter 5 next Tuesday. Next Thursday is exciting because we get to start hands-on stuff. So I'm going to teach you how to be statisticians with research. So we're going to start just very simple. We're going to look at real data sets that I've kept over the years and do some real calculations and comparisons between groups. So what's nice is it's all HHP type data. Some of the data that we'll use has been published in different places and things, so makes it applicable. Looking ahead, your city certificate will be coming up due on the 21st. I thought maybe on Thursday as we finish Chapter 5, I could spend a few minutes just going into those websites and showing you how to do that. Honestly, it's not the most interesting. It's a little bit time consuming, so have some good music playing or something while you're going through those modules. But it's in order to do a thesis or any research at MSUB, everyone has to complete that. And it's good for 3 years, so you'll be long gone before you ever have to renew that. So do you have any questions? Okay, all right, well, let's jump up here. So what I'd like to do is go through each of these parts. You see some general instructions there as far as how many pages for each section. These are just guidelines. Certainly if you want to take a little more on a given section or a little less off of a certain section, that's fine, but this is a pretty good guide. So looking at the past several years, I replaced the 2 previous proposals with a proposal that fit more like what I had envisioned for this class. So if you go to the thesis proposal helpful materials here, you'll see a sample and then also a sample student paper in APA format. So just understand that this one was done in 2017, whereas this is 2023, APA 7. So it's not exactly the same in some cases. If you have your page number on the bottom right versus the top right, I'm not going to, subtract points. Okay, so just keep that thought in mind as you go through. But the general sections are the same, and the length of each section is kind of what I'm looking for with the thesis proposal. So, all right, so components of the research proposal. Hello, Jackie. All right, so we start with title page. So you see the general format here. So back in 2017, this proposal was written by Cassie Christensen, validation of Polar A300 fitness test to predict VO2 max. And so we're looking at the Polar device that's able to predict maximum oxygen uptake at rest. And we're comparing that with one of the criterion methods of assessing VO2 max, which is the Bruce protocol. Okay, so how many have done the Bruce protocol? So if you've had exercise physiology, you've had the wonderful experience of going right to exhaustion where you almost have to be carried off the treadmill. So with a resting aerobic capacity test, it's obviously much more user-friendly, and that's why we have a study like this. It's very useful. Okay, so if we can have a resting test that gives you close to the same result as what you would get going through the Bruce protocol, then that's a win. That's going to be a great tool to promote fitness. So you can see the way that Cassie wrote this, a thesis proposal. So you could say a research proposal submitted to, you could put my name, so Willardson, and then health and human performance in partial fulfillment of, you could say, the kinesiology research methods class would be one way to word that. So you decide on how to word that, and then you could put these 3 lines here, KIN 364, Department of Health, Human Performance, Montana State University, Billings. Okay. So then page 2 would come your table of contents, and so I've included a link in instruction for Word, how to make the table of contents and how you get these neat little dots that go all the way across. Makes me think when I was doing my thesis several years ago, it wasn't as sophisticated as what we have today. So take advantage of the technology and tools to get your table of contents. So this would probably be what you'd write last. So you have the page numbers all marked out, and so then you know exactly what to put here. But this is all of the sections. If you look at what these are, it's exactly what is in the course outline. So this is your course outline, and so everything you see in the table of contents is there. Okay, so after the references in the appendices is where you'll put your informed consent. So remember, this is not an official thesis. You're only doing kind of an observational pilot study. So some of you are just going to have a few participants, depending on your question. But I do want you to do a practice informed consent. As you move on to a thesis, then you can polish everything up, and that's where you'll actually use the informed consent. But just for practice and to get you started, you'll put your informed consent in the appendices. So right at the very last part. Okay, so the next comes the abstract. So we're on page 3. So notice that the research hasn't actually been conducted yet. So you're kind of speaking in future tense. So the purpose of this research project will be. So going through the introduction, notice there's a few citations. So it's not a complete lit review. So the beauty of an abstract is you can get an idea of what's being done without actually going and digging into the paper. So a very, very brief introduction, some nice key points, rationale or justification for the study, maybe a little bit of history and importance of your project. So the Polar A300 fitness watch claims to measure your aerobic fitness at rest in just 5 minutes. So that's great, right? 5 minutes at rest, and you know what your VO2 max is, which is then good because then you can prescribe your exercise from that. So you know where you fit in the general population in that measure. So very strong relationship between your VO2 max and mortality. So there's a threshold that you want to make sure that measure is at for longevity. Okay, so the result evaluates your maximal oxygen uptake of healthy adults. If this tool is accurate and reliable, it can be used to improve the health of the general population as well as peak athletic performance. Okay, so the purpose of this study, so there's a few mistakes in here. I would have probably said, rather than say is, the purpose of this study will be, would how you'd want to word that, will be to test and analyze the claim of Polar A300 fitness watch and activity tracker feature. And so what she did is compare the A300 result with a Bruce protocol, followed by a Bruce protocol treadmill test using the COSMED FitMate Pro to analyze VO2 max. And so it's a descriptive correlational type study. So in chapter 6 we'll get into correlations, but correlations tell you the strength of the relationship between variables. So what Cassie was looking for here is a strong positive correlation between the resting VO2 max test and the Bruce protocol. So she had 20 participants. So how many of you have had exercise physiology? Yeah, and so you can imagine recruiting 20 people to do the Bruce protocol. How many have done the Bruce protocol? Show of hands. Yeah. So I had a class during my doctorate program where all we did was max testing. So we were either tested or we were conducting the test. So we got used to getting to that exhaustion point, but it's hard to motivate yourself to do that when you know that, okay, this is going to be right to the point of exhaustion. So hopefully the goal is to find an easier way to get to that same value, because that value is important for health purposes as well as performance reasons. And so then the very last part, she goes into how that relationship will be assessed. And so Pearson R-test. So Pearson correlations is what you'll learn how to calculate. There's different ways, but Pearson is the most popular method to assess a relationship. And then an additional t-test will be run to determine the difference in absolute means of the polar VO2 max results to the Bruce test. So correlation and then a t-test to assess significance. So ideally, should there be a significant difference? In the study, no. You don't want a significant difference. If you have a significant difference between those values, then that's not a good thing in this case, because you want them to be very close together. Okay, so the next section, so beginning on page 4, you're going to go through your background. So this is what you should be doing right now, is looking at literature. So all of those nice search engines. What's the best search engine for us in HHP? You remember what it's called? Sport Discus. That's the one. So just go there first, and you'll probably find everything you need. So I've highlighted some key words and phrases here in red, so you can get the idea of what the background is about. Theoretical foundation, historical framework, small lit review, most essential material. So within an introduction, it's kind of like a mini literature review so this is where you take just your best stuff and you put it out there to begin with. Excuse me. Okay, so problem statement. Now, a statement sounds like how many sentences? Just one. It's actually not one, so it can be multiple sentences. So it's a short paragraph, multiple sentences that provides a statement on the current literature and maybe the gap. So what are some holes in the literature that your study is designed to improve or fill that And what's the message to practitioners? What's the usefulness of your project? So you can see Cassie wrote it this way. It has been significantly demonstrated. So this is, like I said, I've written and published over 100 studies. So you look, writing comes with time. So I probably would have worded this just a different way, but this is great how it is. So it has been significantly demonstrated numerous times that aerobic cardiovascular fitness results in short-term and long-term benefits, both psychologically and physiologically. Okay, so that's your catch. So pulling the reader in. So why is this important? However, these tests are time-consuming. How long does the Bruce protocol test take? About 15 minutes, give or take. Require professional to administer and are not suitable for all individuals to perform on their own. So I would say that's definitely true with the Bruce test. Therefore, an accurate and reliable device would be highly beneficial to accurately and efficiently measure aerobic fitness for any individual, anytime, such as the fitness test on the Polar A300 fitness watch. This is almost like a late night infomercial, isn't it? Some of you are watching this and just reading that, I'm thinking, where can I get me one of these, you know? So do you have an idea of what the problem statement, what your problem statement will look like? So as we're going through this, think about how this is going to be with your own question. So how are you going to address this? How are you going to sell me on your question? Okay, significance of the study. So in red there, why is your research needed? What's the importance and the impact? So sometimes it's health, sometimes it's performance. Is there a difference in exercising for health versus performance? Yeah, what's the difference? Yeah, if you want to be the very best at something versus just be healthy, is there a difference in how you approach it? Yeah, but are there some things that are probably important for both? Yeah, so VO2 max is definitely one of those that you can say, yeah, you better be doing your cardio because chances are you'll live longer. Not always, but that's the evidence indicates that. And then if you're like Carson there, and you're an endurance athlete, these superhumans that can run forever, it's also going to be important for that activity. Okay, so significance. How did Carly write this? So aerobic cardiovascular fitness is a crucial component of overall health and quality of life. So having an accurate and reliable device to measure and track fitness levels will not only improve one's health in a clinical setting, such as decreasing risk of cardiovascular disease, heart attack, or stroke. Wow, that makes me want to do some cardio. But also for an athlete's ability to reach optimal peak performance throughout training. So having that number is important because with training, you would expect that number to go up, right? So that's one of the key factors that affects endurance performance. You want that number to go up. For health, you wouldn't want that number to drop below a certain level. So you'd want to make sure you're maintaining that number over time. So the purpose statement. So this is, all of you have done this. It's another way of describing what is your research question. A purpose statement is as a declarative statement or the main goal. So here, the purpose of this study is to test and analyze the claim of the Polar A300 fitness watch and activity tracking feature. This will be done by comparing the final VO2 max reading of the Polar to the Bruce protocol treadmill test. So you have one number from each test, and hopefully those numbers will be close together. Those numbers will match up. Okay, so the process is stating the research question or questions that the research is designed to address. So taking your purpose and reformulating it in the form of a question. Okay, so for this study, very simple, just one question. Will there be a statistically significant relationship between the Polar A300 VO2 max estimate and the Bruce test VO2 max estimate? So very simple, straightforward. I like how a lot of you are kind of refining your research question a little bit. So the first when I first looked over your research questions, I was thinking a little bit on the general side for some of them, but now a lot of you are kind of refining them, getting more specific to exactly what you want to measure, which is good. So you don't want to take on everything in one area. You just want to focus on one specific part. Okay, so here's where we have our hypotheses. So there's two parts. Very important to state both. So you have the alternative hypothesis, and then you have the null hypothesis. So coming up in our stats chapters, we're going to do tests of significance. So we're looking at probability. So the probability, significance is defined as the probability that differences between groups were not due to chance, not due to chance occurrence. So that's the alternative hypothesis. There are significant differences not due to random chance, and they are indeed real. The usual probability value adopted is 0.05, which means that 95 times out of 100, differences that you see between groups are real. What about the other 5 times out of 100? Due to random chance, which is why we have our null hypothesis. So the null hypothesis says there's no actual or real differences between groups. Any observed differences are due to random chance. So how many of you have heard of the concept of a type 1 error in stats? Okay, so a type 1 error is when your statistical test says there's differences, but in actuality there's really not. So p less than or equal to 0.05 means that 5% of the time you're going to make a type 1 error. When your stat says there's differences, but in reality they're not. So p equals 0.05, 5% chance of a type 1 error. So you can see how she worded this here. So there will be statistically significant relationship. There will not be a statistically significant relationship. So again, just kind of being a little bit nitpicky here, but I want you to have the best writing possible to say. So there will be is here, and then there will not. So rather than there is, you'd say there will not be a statistically significant relationship. Okay, operational definitions. Why is this important? So you turn it into me, and yeah, I'll know what you're talking about, or I may not. So what about someone outside the field? Yeah, they don't know what you're talking about. So this is why you have a section, and you don't need to have an exhaustive section on definitions. You decide what definitions need to be there, but when choosing those, which ones to include, imagine yourself not being an HHP major. So a friend or relative that's maybe not an HHP major, what would they ask you? Which terms would they want clarification? So meaning of key procedures, actions, or processes. So let's see what Carly did here. So operational definitions. Healthy college-age individuals, young college adults, free of cardiovascular disease or any health conditions that might inhibit accurate and optimal physical performance for reliable results on these tests. So what's a quick tool you can use to determine if they're free of any health conditions and apparently healthy? You heard of anyone? There's one popular one that everybody uses. So you have them fill this out, and then you have them fill the informed consent out. How many have heard of the PAR-Q? The old PAR-Q. So it's been around forever. So it's a really good 7 questions, and you can get a general idea of their overall health status. So if you have a familiarization session, it's generally PAR-Q, and then you look to see, okay, they didn't answer any of the questions in the affirmative, so they're good to go. And then after that, you would go with the informed consent. So that's how familiarization sessions go. Statistically significant results. So looking at the Pearson R again, and then the probability less than 0.05 for significance. Failure, that's kind of important. People may want to know, okay, well, how are you evaluating the Bruce test? When does that end? What's the end point? Failure on the Bruce test refers to the individual running as long and as hard as they can until they cannot run any further, and then have to grasp the side rails to hop off and set both feet on the sides of the treadmill safely. So I've seen some of you do that test, and so that's intense. The longest, it's 7 stages, 3 minutes, and I've seen one person that got into stage 7. In all my 20 years of being a professor, I've seen one person that got to stage 7. And he was an All-American, so it's pretty cool. All right, so assumptions, statements by the researcher that certain elements of the research are understood to be true. Okay, so how would you write this? So in the context of this particular research project, it is assumed that all participants are going as hard and as far as possible during the Bruce test. That can be a factor, right? Okay, so you have to assume that the people that are willing to participate in this study, in this huge, exhaustive test, you have to assume that they're actually pushing it to the limit to get the highest possible oxygen consumption value. It is assumed that all participants follow the guidelines for pre-testing sessions, such as not exercising or consuming caffeine prior to the testing session. Can caffeine affect how you test? Yeah, aerobic and anaerobic performance has been shown to be significantly different following consumption of caffeine. So that can definitely be a factor. The health condition of the participant is reliant on their word. So are they being honest with you on the Part Q? So these things are all assumptions that you make as a researcher. Okay, limitations. So aspects of the research project over which the researcher has limited control. So with projects that are like what we do here, where it's kind of quasi-experimental with a little bit looser control, there are certain limitations. So let's see what Carly said. So a limitation for this study includes small, non-randomized sample population of 20 healthy college individuals. So does this limitation affect your ability to generalize? Yeah. So what is generalizing? You have a study, you conduct it, you have the results. You conduct the study in the first place because you want to benefit society, right? And so there's maybe a particular segment that the study involved and focused on. So maybe the results of this study are most relevant to the population that was examined. So a young, healthy, fit college student, probably different than a middle-aged or an elderly person in the application, or even an adolescent or child would be different. In order for these, and then you state that, so in order for these research results to be able to generalize to a larger population for increased external validity, more participants are needed, as well as in a variety of subpopulations such as the elderly. And then reiterating with the Bruce test going as hard and as far as possible to get the absolute criterion VO2 max value. Okay, so delimitations. So these are boundaries that are set on purpose. So type of participant. So if you're conducting your study, what type of participants are you most likely to involve? Your peers, right? Yeah, you're going to come to my 105 class because they're required to participate in 2 studies as part of the class, and you'll say, will you help me with my study? And they'll willingly volunteer, and that's the boundary that you set for your study, because that's who you have available to complete the project. So If you might investigate a widespread phenomenon, but choose, or maybe under the circumstances, you focus your study on a specific age group, ethnicity, or gender. So you want to make that known. So let's see how Carly did this. So a major delimitation of this experiment includes the lack of a randomized test, lack of randomized test subjects in the population. So you're not getting out the phone book and picking people at random that are somehow going to come in and do your test. You're purposely selecting a sample. So this was done due to the small amount of individuals attending MSUB to recruit who are willing to volunteer to participate in this study. So absolutely fine to state that. That's what you have available. Okay, so any questions so far? So I hope you're looking over this and thinking, well, how could I word my own sections for your proposal? So then comes a lit review. So this is going to be approximately 4 pages. So 6, 7, 8, 9 was what I had in there. You can go a little more if you want to. You can go a little less, but going from 4 pages to 1 page is probably not a good idea. I want you to go a little more than that. Okay, so a brief review of key aspects related to the research proposal topic. So one of the best ways to write a literature review is to make an outline. So I just pulled from the ACSM 2009 position, Stand on Resistance Training. I made a sample outline of what may have been done prior to writing that. So you can see here different sections, progression principles, and then trainable characteristics. They started with muscle strength and then went to hypertrophy and power and localized endurance, but they examined the same variables, the same 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They examined the same 9 variables in the context of each trainable characteristic. So the next step with this, it would see, okay, well, what have I found in my literature search? And then underneath each of these, you could plug in a study. So, you know, so-and-so et al. Had a good study on muscle action, and so on. So then you're plugging in how you're going to use different studies under each part of your outline. So I'm not asking you for an outline, but it would be helpful. Instead of just sitting down with a huge pile of literature and then looking at it thinking, okay, where do I begin? It'd be best if you kind of thought, okay, how do I want to organize this? And then maybe, okay, I'll take these 4 studies and I'm going to put them over here and I'm going to use those under this subheading. And then your literature review just flows together, because then you can say, okay, these studies tie together under this topic, these studies tie together under the next topic. Makes it really easy to put things together. Okay, so your methods. So what population are you using? So you'll have a big heading, methodology. First thing you'll talk about is your population. What type of participants? What's their health status? What's their training status? How did you recruit these participants? Usually in this section, you might report demographic variables. So you'll see commonly in studies, age, body mass, height. Sometimes if it's a strength study, their 1 RM is reported. So all about your participants in this section. So how did Carly do this? So this study will include 20 healthy college-age individuals who volunteer for the Montana State University Billings campus. Health status of these individuals will be disease-free. Okay, so remember your Part Q. College-age individuals who are capable of performing the Bruce protocol treadmill test until failure. Anthropometric data such as height and weight, gender and age will be taken prior to testing. Okay, sampling method. So how did you go about recruiting? So Was it just word of mouth, or did you make flyers? Did you ask a professor if you could come to class and make a brief presentation? So this is where you describe all of that. So she didn't go into much detail there. Probably would have preferred if she went, okay, well, MSUB campus, that's lots of people, where are you going on campus to get participants would be a good thing to report. Okay, so equipment. This is another one where some people may not understand outside HHP, so I want to report what equipment you're using. So, Christine, if you're using, like, say, a jump mat, you'd want to, okay, this is the jump mat, and there's lots of jump mats, and so you'd want to be specific about which one and how it works and so on. So most jump mats are flight time, right? And so you'd want to state that. Okay, so the equipment that will be required for this experiment includes a TrackMaster treadmill, Cosmed FitMate Pro system, a Polar A300 heart rate monitor and fitness watch, computer system for polar analysis. I like this. Clipboard. So that's being specific here. Data recording sheets, a calculator to perform the non-exercise prediction calculations, and a Detecto balance beam scale and a Seika stadiometer. So as specific as possible, just everything that you're going to possibly involve to conduct your project. Okay. So in terms of procedures, that will be next. I didn't take a snapshot of that, so if you look at this proposal, the procedures are right here. So you can see how just the heading, procedures, and then nice paragraphs here describing each part of the data collection process. So all the way down, it looked like a little more than a page before we get to research design there. So I'm assuming for all of you, it probably would be pretty similar in your procedures. Just everything that goes on to come up with your data goes into that section. Okay, so then we get to the research design. This is the blueprint, collection, measurement, analysis. So there's different types of studies. We've talked a little bit about this before. So descriptive study is kind of observational. You're just collecting numbers. Can be cross-sectional design, where you're just collecting data on a specific characteristic between different population subgroups. Correlational, okay, so that's what this particular study happens to be. So the correlation between two different measures of VO2 max. Quasi-experimental, this is what a lot of yours will be. The difference between quasi-experimental and experimental is the level of control. So quasi-experimental is not randomized, so that involves, okay, I'm just going to invite students that are my peers at MSUB. That's quasi-experimental. You're not randomizing anything. You can randomize to conditions, but your participants are still limited to the population here at the school. Versus experimental research, where it's very tightly controlled, randomized, everything from temperature, humidity, food intake. So there's a little bit of subjective interpretation here about whether yours might be quasi or experimental. Most of the time it's going to be quasi-experimental. And this can include both longitudinal and cross-sectional. It's just, if you're collecting data in a public weight room, that's not completely controlled, right? You've got lots going on around, including, do people perform differently if they know other people could be watching? Oh yeah, yeah, that makes a huge difference. If you know that there's people around, they might be watching, they might not be, but your chances are humans tend to push themselves a little more if they know that there's other people watching. So quasi-experimental. So all participants will undergo an identical correlational experiment. So correlational between the Bruce test and the Polar A300. Okay, so getting down to the end here, statistical analysis. So this is what we'll spend lots of the semester on with our Excel software, and I'm going to teach you how to do all this in Excel. How are you going to come up with the answer to your research question? This is what happens. This is where you're going to get your answers. So you collect all this data, you have all these numbers, and you're putting them into your Excel spreadsheet, and then you got to come up with an answer. And so that's where the analysis comes in. So I'm going to teach you how to do that. So descriptive statistics will be reported as mean and standard deviation. So that's things like age, height, weight, so on. Pearson's R-test will be used to determine the relationship between VO2 max readings of the Bruce test and the Polar Watch VO2 max. So I can already, just reading that, I can already see tables. So table 1 is going to be your demographics. Table 2 is going to be probably the individual measures. So okay, 20 rows, 20 participants, and then you have column 2 and column 3. So VO2 max on the Bruce test, and then VO2 max on the Polar Watch. And then you're probably going to put a difference column. Column 4 would be your difference between the two measures. And then right at the bottom, you're going to put your Pearson R. So what's the overall relationship between those two measures? And we're hoping it's close and not significantly different. Okay, so then would come your references. Yes?
This part's not due at the start. This is the purpose due afterwards?
Your proposal is going to be due just before spring break.
March 2nd.
Yes, yeah.
But it's still on.
The statistical is going to be with your presentation at the very end. So if you look at the very end of the semester, there's a day when you're going to present, and that's when you'll report to the class. So you're not going to, you'll do a final paper with your thesis that you turn in, but for this class, you'll just do your study, your data collection sometime after spring break, and then you'll include your results with your presentation.
So what's due on March 2nd is everything up through statistics, up to.
You'll know what you're going to be doing at that point,
Yeah.
but you just don't have any data yet to report results. So results aren't reported till end of the semester. So yeah, everything that we go through today should be in your proposal. Absolutely. So references. So I specified their original investigations, okay, peer-reviewed journals, and then you can also have 5 minimum combination of literature reviews, books, book chapters, or online electronic sources. So pretty good balance in where you're getting your material. So I included this from the sample paper in APA format. So if you open this APA 7 student sample paper, there's all the sections included here. So it looks like the title page has changed a little bit from when from the 2017. But then there's a lot of instruction here about formatting and in-text citations and so on. References right at the very end. Get here. So this is the snapshot of that's in the PowerPoint, just showing you how to format different types of references in APA 7 format. So I encourage you to have more than 10 references, but that's just the minimal guideline for a proposal like this. Okay, so that's the very end, and then of course your appendices or appendix down here, following the last reference page, that's where you'll put your informed consent. So we haven't gone over informed consent yet. That'll come in the next few weeks. So do you have questions about your proposal, any parts of it? Okay, so if you have questions about anything, any parts of it that are specific to your question that might be different from what we reviewed up here, just let me know. Okay, all right. So at this point, I would like to shift gears and let's go a little bit into chapter 5 for today. So,
Sorry, I do have a question.
yes.
For the literature review, like with the example you gave that had a lot more like components to it, to make ours fit between that like 3 and 4 page range, do you have any suggestions on like how to get that length?
Yeah, make an outline. So just your key topics, what you're going to discuss under those topics, and how many pages you intend to take with each of those studies or topics. Yeah. So just come talk to me about, what you want to cover. So you're not covering the body of literature, it's stuff that's most relevant to your topic. So, and it's a proposal. A proposal is different than a final paper. A proposal is, and people that read a proposal are expecting more brevity than exhaustive search of the literature. So key points is the guide. So yeah, an outline really helps because then you can kind of narrow your focus on just which topics are most important. Okay, so chapter 5. So exam next Tuesday, chapters 1, 2, and 5. So let's get in and talk about a little bit of chapter 5 today. So the idea with this whole chapter, I love this picture. So see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Can I ignore the ethical issue? So let's dive in. Okay, so in this chapter we're going to talk about scientific misconduct, and there's a lot of it, especially when money's involved. So we'll go over some examples, HHP related, data gathering procedures, publication practices, scientific mistakes. So scientists do make mistakes, and how to amend for that in a journal, because there's always seems like almost monthly, the very last part of a journal, there'll be a section on manuscript clarification. And this is good, because now scientists are saying, okay, in this part of our study we made a mistake, so we'd like to retract this part. And that's the way you do things, be upfront and truthful with it. Protecting human participants, and then use of animals in research. Okay, so definition of scientific misconduct. So what is it? White House Office of Science and Technology Policy defined scientific misconduct is fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism in proposing, performing, or reviewing research, or in reporting research results. Okay, so first thing, there's so many examples in HHP because a lot of them are supplement examples. So supplement industry is huge. And so where are supplement companies going to go if they want research on their product? Especially if it's in the United States. They're going to go to universities, right? Because we have all this equipment and scientists to measure these things. So this was kind of a big deal. It happened a few years ago at the University of Oklahoma. And it caused that one particularly, he was a very famous sports scientist, lost his job, and now he's at Lindenwood University in St. Louis, and he's doing well. But I want you to go ahead, I want you to click on this. It's about a 1-minute read, and read through it, tell me what your thoughts are. Guess which school used to do all the research for General Nutrition Center? It was Oklahoma. So all of GNC's products used to be, which was a huge amount of money for them. What was the product? Something creatine nitrate or something? Creatine nitrate? Yeah, creatine nitrate. So performing biopsies on graduate students, not good. In trouble for that. Submitting himself into a research study, can't do that either. So we have to do things differently, right? So that's what we're going to talk about in this chapter. How can we be better? Okay, so let's talk about plagiarism to start with. So using ideas, concepts, writings, or drawings of others as your own. So I'm sure you've all been lectured to death on this already. So the idea is to give proper credit. If it's not your own, you need to give proper credit. So how can we give proper credit? That's where citations come into play. So example, in writing her research proposal, Shana periodically takes multiple sentences verbatim. What does verbatim mean? Exactly. From some of her sources. Her attitude is, I couldn't have written it better myself. So is she wrong to do that? Okay. What if she provides a reference despite writing verbatim to her sources at the end of the paragraph? Is she still wrong? Yeah. So if it's verbatim, what do we need? Quotes. Yes, we need to quote it. This is a quote. And if it's more than just a few lines, it needs to actually be indented and blocked so that we know that this is actually verbatim. So that's in that APA paper. So if you don't understand quotes and how to cite those, come and see me on that part. Okay, so fabrication, falsification. So National Science Foundation reported that peer-reviewed research articles increased annually from 460,000 in 1988, so across how many journals they must have looked at, to 760,000 in 2008. That's a lot. So you wonder, how many of them include data that wasn't legit? So the pressure to falsify or fake data has been particularly intense in medical or health-related research due to external funding. Promotion at universities. not here, but at some universities, there is this mentality of publish or perish. What does that mean? In fact, I went to an interview one time where I was talking to the dean and he said, first thing he said is, we are not publish or perish. So what did he mean by that?
You don't get fired.
That's exactly right. So, but there is that mentality at some institutions. Dr. Schaefer and I have talked a lot about this, like at the University of Pittsburgh, where he got his PhD, you have to have so many million in funding in order to get tenure. So you have 6 years from the time you start to have a certain amount of external funding, or you don't make tenure. And so that happens. So there's a lot of pressure. So if you're not getting quite the results that you've spent all this time collecting, there's pressure there. So you have to know going in, what are you going to do? How many have heard of HMB? Beta-hydroxy beta-methylbutyrate. It's a metabolite of the amino acid leucine. Okay, so leucine, one of the branched chain amino acids, and there's been a lot of research on HMB, especially in elderly people, to help maintain muscle mass. So how relevant is that to nice, strapping, healthy people? Probably not as relevant. So this is another study. So what I want you to do, so activity, I want you to work together. You can work together individually. I want you to click on this part, and I want you to answer these questions. So I want you to come down. So this particular study, published in 2016, Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, has received lots of scrutiny in the scientific community among sports scientists. So what you do is you download the PowerPoint, and then you can, you can click on this link, and then you'll answer these questions. So recently I collaborated with some of the world's top scientists on a letter to the editor about a study at the bottom of that slide, published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, that showed an extremely large anabolic effect, muscle building effect, to consuming a supplement containing HMB and ATP. How many of you knew you could take ATP from a bottle? Oral ATP. Yeah. Doesn't work very well because the liver destroys it before it ever does anything, but that's what they did. Okay, so we wrote an extensive letter that covered our issues with the paper in hopes of seeking truth in science. However, we had to substantially cut down our response to confirm the journal's policy. Thus I wanted to present the unedited version of our letter here so that further discussion can be had on the topic. And so these are all the sports scientists here that contributed to this letter. And so then you'll look at those questions on the slide, and the questions are based on the paragraphs here. So I want you to just take a crack at reading through this letter. The authors of this letter read with skepticism the recent report from Lowry employing a supplement that provided 3 grams of beta-hydroxy beta-methylbutyrate as a free acid, plus 400 milligrams of oral adenosine triphosphate in young men who resistance trained for 12 weeks. Okay, so I'll let you take it from here. Go ahead and grab a piece of paper, name at the top. And so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions. So we just answered the first question for you. So there was 3 grams of free acid HMB, 400 milligrams of ATP. We answered the second question. What was it? 12 weeks. Those of you who are experienced in resistance training, you take a trained person, how much muscle mass can you gain in 12 weeks? 3 months. So what they're reporting there is pretty unbelievable. Remember right after I read this, I went and looked at how much a bottle of ATP costs. It's pretty expensive. Probably just look up truth in science. Brad Schoenfeld. about 2 more minutes. Okay, what was the mean gain for the supplemented group? 8.5 kilograms. That's almost 19 pounds of pure muscle. For a trained person? No, that's not happening. You saw that? Would you want to go buy a bottle? Probably would. What are the limitations of DEXA?
It was quoted, cannot specifically discern skeletal muscle mass
Mm-hmm.
compared to CT or MRI.
And the measurements can be affected by hydration status, exercise status, right? So you could measure someone in a DEXA scan is really nice to have. It's a criterion measure for body composition, but there has to be standardized procedures before you take the scan. You could have differences in the same individual on the same day before and after a workout, and drastically different results. So that's why we have all these standardized procedures before we take a measurement. So what form of HMB is supported? And it's supported in mostly elderly individuals. Yeah, so not the free acid form, but the calcium HMB at 3 grams a day. There is some evidence to support that. But it's not, would an elderly individual be taking it to, get, big? No, they're looking at maintaining muscle, right? Because that's important for physical function. So it's a completely different paradigm. So what about supplementing with ATP? You get up in the morning, you take your ATP, right? Along with your vitamins? No, there's nothing that really supports it. It's broken down in the liver before it ever gets anywhere where a muscle could use it. So hang on to that. I'll collect them at the end. But you just go to show, Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research is an international journal. And so, stuff like this creeps into that, and then you're looking at that thinking, well, how? People that are on anabolic steroids would have a hard time making those types of gains. And that's the mean gain in lean body mass, which means what? Some people were more than that. So anyway, pretty unbelievable. Okay, so this brings into play another example. So the FTC has really cracked down on the exercise devices. I don't know if you've noticed within the last 5 years, you're not seeing as much on the television where they're advertising these gimmicky devices, usually to target this area, right? So back around 2009, there was this device called the AbCircle Pro. The AbCircle Pro. So you had this, and you held on to the handles here, and then you could adjust the resistance. There was a little knob right in the center, and then you put your knees in these pads, and then it was like a hip swivel. So you were up here, and then you down, so you're coming down the hill, and then you're up the other side again. So you're just kind of working that core with lateral flexion. And so their thing was, okay, 3 minutes a day, and you're gonna have this tremendous looking, abs, right? So they had to repay 25 million, up to 25 million for customers that wanted a refund. So if you go in here, you don't have to do this, but the more complete article is right here. Come on. Here it comes. Okay. So, what did they say? Okay, so according to the FTC, in advertisements, the defendants promised that a 3-minute workout on the AbCircle Pro, a fiberglass disc with stationary handlebars and 2 knee rests that roll on the edge of the disc, allowing consumers to kneel and rotate side to side, was equivalent to doing 100 sit-ups. In the infomercial, pitch woman Jennifer Nicole Lee compared the AbCircle Pro to a gym workout, saying you can either do 30 minutes of abs and cardio or just 3 minutes a day. The choice is yours, right? So I'm gonna go out and buy one of these, right? So no, it takes more than 3 minutes a day. So that's basically what the FTC came up with. So there's your, it's right there at any rate. So they had to give some money back to people that wanted it. So that brings in my involvement with them. Was not with their 3 minutes a day thing, but they funded another study comparing the AbCircle muscle activation with traditional exercises. So at that point in time, I had a thesis student, so Miranda here, that's her. And so she was my graduate student at that time, and so we came up with this idea. So there's this product, and they're willing to give us some money to do this research. So ours was published in 2010. So what we did is we compared the AbCircle Pro, so you can see Miranda here doing the AbCircle there, with some of the more traditional exercises for around this area, so around the core. And so this is what we came up with. So looking at external oblique abdominis activity, the AbCircle Pro had 3 different resistance levels. So rectus abdominis right here in front. So level 1, 2, and 3. So is there any difference in rectus abdominis activity for those 3 levels? So 3 is supposed to be the hardest, 1 is supposed to be the easiest. It didn't really make a difference for the external oblique abdominis. So then you see the activity in millivolts here for a crunch and a side bridge and a quadruped. So it looks like the traditional side bridge here was your winner there for the external obliques. So the AbCircle Pro costs $250. How much does the side bridge cost? 0. Okay, so which is the whole point. So lumbar erector spinae, so I'm thinking their resistance levels probably weren't really enough of a difference to get your muscles to work harder. So crunch, side bridge, quadruped. So again, side bridge was your winner for lumbar erector spinae. Lower abdominal stabilizers, okay, so this includes the transverse abdominis and internal obliques. So the fibers blend together down here by your belt line. And so again, really not much of a differentiation between AbCircle Pro levels. So lower abdominal stabilizers, the crunch would seem to be the best one there in terms of activity. And then rectus abdominis, it looked like maybe the AbCircle Pro resistance levels, 1, 2, and 3, there was kind of a progressive. But if you look at just the traditional ones, without any equipment at home in your living room, right? The activity was just as good or better. So we published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. You can see how I wrote the practical applications here. The results of the study indicate that the anterior, posterior, and lateral trunk musculature can be activated to similar or even greater levels by performing the 3 traditional exercises versus the ab circle. This was particularly evident for the side bridge exercise, which elicited significantly greater activity of the rectus abdominis versus the ab circle levels 1 and 2, and so on. So I get down to the very bottom and say, okay, from a muscle activation standpoint, the ab circle does not provide a superior stimulus versus the traditional trunk exercises when performed with body mass. Alternatively, the ab circle can be included if greater variety is desired depending on individual preferences. So that was kind of a safe approach. We did acknowledge after the practical applications, this study was funded by Fitness Brands Inc. 6 ab circle devices were donated to conduct this study. The results of this investigation do not constitute endorsement of the ab circle by the authors, their institutions, or the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So it was pretty neutral, ethical. We reported exactly what we got in the data. We didn't try to fabricate or falsify anything. And guess what? They didn't get sued for that part. They got sued for the other part where they were saying 3 minutes and you'll lose all this weight. Okay, so how are we doing? All right, let's do one more example here. Okay, so case study. I want you to just read through it here up on the slide. Okay, so Professor Wade, how dare you? Shame on you. So did Professor Wade act ethically? No, he did not. Are there going to be non-responders to exercise programs? Yeah. Yeah, there's people that don't respond. Is it important to report their data too? Absolutely. Okay, how do you define an outlier? What's an outlier?
One that doesn't follow the general fit.
Yeah, there's people that are, all of us in some context are probably an outlier. We don't respond the same way as everybody else to a certain intervention. So in this case, it was strength. So you had outliers that didn't respond as well. Yes?
Is that usually measured, like how far of an deviation away? Is it
Mhm.
like 1 or 2? Does it matter?
Or 3.
3? Is 1 like the threshold?
I think it's 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, is an outlier. So, so his reason was they must have not adhered to the training. How does he know that? You didn't ask him. Didn't say. Okay, how long should you keep raw data available for others to review following publication? So federal law says 3 years. 3 years. There's an actual law. You have to keep it for 3 years. So are you obligated to provide your raw data for examination upon request? Yeah. It's becoming more strict. It's kind of a loose guideline, but more and more journals, before they ever will accept your paper, are requiring that you make it available. So things are getting a little bit better in that regard, because chances are if you ask for data, how likely are they to give it to you? Not very, especially if it's Brad Schoenfeld asking you, right? So yeah, if it's anything that you feel like is going to have a negative impact, you're probably not going to give it unless you're required. So let's go ahead. This is probably a good place to stop today, and we go to non-publication on Thursday. So do you have any questions? Okay, so let me collect those just so I won't forget to put some points in the grade book. Appreciate you coming today. So we'll get into some more entertaining, ethical stuff on Thursday. Just add your name to it. So keep working on that literature search. Yes. I'll give this to you now and give it to everybody else on
Okay,
Thursday.
perfect.
So
Thank
this
you.
assignment is posted under the assignments tab, and so you
Okay.
can click on these links to
Okay.
answer those questions. So, yeah, and then I'll just have the video posted after class on Thursday.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
but then look for the study guide, because we've got a test on Tuesday.